Hello everyone and welcome to Learn Channel Studio. I am Teuta and I will be your host for today together with Philip.
Hello from me as well, and thank you for tuning in to our 10th episode. We broadcast every day, so make sure to follow us and check the latest trends in the learning and development industry.
Our new guests for today are L3RN senior coaching expert Goran Gakidev, with whom we will open the topic of coaching and positive intelligence. While later, via direct call, we welcome Nigel Penny, who is a specialist trainer on strategy management. Good morning, Goran. Pleasure to have you in our show.
Morning, Teuta. Pleased to be here and thank you for the invitation.
Goran, how would you describe the term coaching? How is it any different from attending other training or taking a course?
Right. So there are a lot of school of thoughts out there, and the one that I personally believe in is basically the one that is partnering with the individual or with the client through a thought-provoking process or creative process while reaching a desired goal. Right? And the thing is how coaching is different from the training is basically in the training you have already designed and set the process of flow of an interaction with either individual or a group, whereas in the coaching is something that is very dynamic, something that comes from within the individual, something that he or she thinks it's important to work and to improve along the way.
Thank you.
During your corporate experience working and contributing to large corporations from the GCC region, and at the same time working with individuals, what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Right. I mean, there are a lot of challenges out there. Taking into consideration there is not, so much clarity around what coaching is, and it comes into different forms, I would say, starting from the individuals and then it goes to the organization itself. So what is the most important thing that we've been working lately is about being aligned between the stakeholders and actually the receiver of the coaching, if we're talking about an organizational coaching. Whereas for, per se, individual coaching is more about getting aligned or setting the expectation in terms of what is going to be the output of the coaching, right? Because we've been still talking that coaching is fairly new compared to the training or any other different type of learning and development option or a solution. Thinking that, like, if you go back, for an instance, 10 years from now, you would have seen coaching being introduced only to the top levels in the organization or available to only executive levels. Whereas now, for an instance, we have through ICF, there was a certain report back in 2020 that there are about 70,000 coaches actually out there to support individuals, which means that the coaching community is getting bigger and it's more affordable and more available to individuals as well as to groups to be able to, get the experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Goran, we're all aware that coaching within the workplace improves not only individual performance, but it also helps identify and develop high potential employees. Now, what was the impact of COVID-19 on organizational coaching? What kind of changes should coaches implement after the pandemic is over?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And the thing is that while having this pandemic, for some reason it sort of has supported the concept of coaching, right? And since most of us been trying to zoom out or through any of the other virtual platforms, it became also more accessible. So we're usually looking at basically supporting individuals online, and this is one way that we can do the coaching. But what I would suggest is actually being able as a coach to adapt to any changes or any sort of a shift in the consumer behavior, because there are constant changes, right? So we've seen different behaviors during the pandemic, we've seen different behavior before the pandemic, and I'm sure that we'll see different behavior after the pandemic. So the critical thing about the coach in particular is being able to sort of adapt and to have a continuous learning process, so we're able to much better serve our audience in particular.
Goran, my next question for you will be about positive intelligence. what exactly it is, and may we call it mental fitness?
Yeah, that's that's something that we've been often discussing with the peers or with the colleagues, and what we try to be is be careful in terms of how we sort of introduce the positive intelligence, right? And one way, of course, as you mentioned, is to have that abbreviation or to link more to the fitness, right? And it comes really, when I think about it, I mean, when we all think about it, for instance, imagine having a certain back pain, right? So the first thing that you do is you go, do a little bit of exercise, you go to the gym, you do a little bit of yoga or, something similar, right? And then the pain stops, it's not there, right? Now, the next thing is, okay, I'm done with it, I don't have to work on my own, everything will be fine. And then, there are a couple of days you don't do much, and then the back pain comes back, right? So it's the same thing with the positive intelligence or with the mental fitness, right? Because there are a lot of, we say that most of the time we're being hijacked by our own mind. And what we try to do is we try to build those brain muscles so we're in a position to navigate or to tweak our mind to work for us instead of working against us. So yes, you can say that it's a sort of a mental fitness sort of a concept.
What is the difference between emotional intelligence and positive intelligence? Which one is crucial for a healthy working environment?
Right. That's a very good point. And as we all know, the EQ or the emotional intelligence has been vastly used in the past 20 years or so. Maybe it's been a little bit more. Now, when we think our ultimate goal, right, it's having a productivity or having an individual or a group being more efficient, more engaged, or more productive. And when we think as a concept in a whole, there are a lot of components that are critical or important to have that efficiency and productivity, right? And some of the concepts are the EQ, as you mentioned, Philip. Some of them are, it's also the cognitive intelligence, which is the IQ. There is also the concept or the integration of the knowledge, the skills, the experiences that we're having in our life related to the work or even outside. So all of that is kind of building this concept of being more productive. But the only thing that is actually validating the percentage of being productive is the positive intelligence, which again, it goes to how much we have this concept about being sabotaged, right? Because at times, or most of the time, we've been sabotaged by our own thoughts, which are getting in the way for us to really have the performance, right? So this is usually the difference between the EQ and the PQ, or the positive intelligence as a concept. I wouldn't distinguish, but it's a sort of an add-on, right? So you need to have both in order to be able to perform and to be more efficient in one organization or even outside of it.
Wonderful insight, Goran. Thank you.
Goran, thank you once again for your great insights. And now we will connect to our expert trainer, Nigel Penny, where he will tell us more about what we have learned during the pandemic and what should our organization do to emerge stronger. Nigel, good morning.
Good morning, Toyota.
It is a great pleasure to welcome you in our show.
Thank you so much.
Nigel, based on your experience and what you have learned during the pandemic, are there any specific learnings about how to manage through it?
Well, I think there are, and I think we're still learning, of course, because we're still in the middle of this pandemic. But I think it's been a hugely disruptive process and time for all of our businesses. I think what many organizations have learned is that they have to tackle this pandemic in a number of different stages. And I've sort of codified this into three. The first of those stages is obviously survive. If you can't actually survive in different situation with lower revenues potentially, then obviously everything else goes by the board. But survival is not enough. We can't just assume that we're going to go back to the way things were and that if we can see it out, then it'll all come back to normal. Instead, many organizations are now understanding the potential for the future that will come from the pandemic. And I call this second stage envision, where we plan for a different future and we plan how our organizations can be successful in that future. And then the third stage is transition, which is when we make the leap from where we were and how we used to operate to how we will choose to operate to take advantage of a very different business future. And I think there's probably a couple of things we should say in terms of direct learnings, two which I think are very, very important that we can put in place and think about going forward into the future. The first is what I would call risk management. Many of our organizations were just not prepared for the pandemic. And you might argue, well, it's a once in a lifetime event. How could we prepare for it? But I do believe there's more we could have done to build risk management processes into our strategy development processes. So I think that's one point. And the second thing I think we've learned as well is the incredible ability of our people to achieve an awful lot in a very short period of time. And I don't think many of us really understood the potential of the people in our organization. And now we need to find ways to harness this going forward so that this level of achievement in short periods of time under difficult circumstances can become a norm for how we get the best from our workforce.
Nigel, but what are the first steps that organizations need to take?
Well, the first step to obviously is survive. We have to get over that hurdle of, do we have a viable business going forward? Many of us have experienced severe downturns in revenue, and obviously with our costs still sitting there, that isn't a tenable situation. So survive is the first phase, but it is a phase and we must get through it as quickly as possible so that we can move on to envision. Now during survive, I think there's some fairly clear things that we have to do. First of all, I think on day one, we have to stop any unnecessary bleeding. So that may be meaning a hiring freeze, cutting consultancy, restructuring or postponing certain projects that we'd already approved. Those type of actions can be taken very quickly. Then within survive come some of the more painful actions. We may need to let some of our workforce go. We may need to lay them off. We may need to say goodbye to some of them on a permanent basis. This is tough, but it's something that needs to be done quickly, because the most important thing is that we can get some degree of surety back to the workforce who will be with us throughout the pandemic and into the future. And there's nothing worse as an employee than wondering when the axe is going to fall on you. So if you have to make those tough decisions, make them quickly, and then give some degree of certainty to the remaining workforce that now we can plan and move towards the future. I think some of the other things we need to do is we need obviously to ensure that we have the necessary lines of credit from our banks. There may be government funding and schemes that we can take advantage of. And that's really something that I think has to be put in place over the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic. Or any future emergency for that matter. And I think with those type of actions in place, we can start then thinking positively and move to that envision phase where we plan for a positive future for our organization.
Nigel, what should our organization be doing to emerge stronger? Do you think that we need to completely reset our strategy?
I think there will be a lot of strategy reset that will be necessary, because the future world is going to look different from the current world. And our previous strategy rather was based on an analysis of a market or markets as they were at that particular time. And those markets are changing. So I do think there is going to be a need to reset our strategy. And maybe I can give you a practical example of that. If you think about the construction industry, well, in the past, a stimulus for the construction industry has usually been large government projects, building roads, power stations, etc. These governments have had to borrow huge amounts of money during the pandemic. They're not going to be able to fund these large infrastructure projects going forward into the future. So the model for delivering infrastructure will change. No longer will the government issue tenders, construction companies build and get paid for the build. Increasingly, we're seeing a model of build, own and operate, where the construction company actually builds the infrastructure and then gets a 20-year contract to manage and operate that. Well, that's a very different business from the business that they were running previously. It requires different skills, different capabilities. And those have to be put in place now in order to take advantage of this new world. So that's one example, but I think in almost every industry, we need to think about what will our future world look like post-pandemic, and what will be the new opportunities, and maybe what will be the new way that we will have to operate. So I think it's both a strategy reset and an operating model reset. And that needs to be done now. We can't wait until we emerge from the pandemic, because otherwise our competitors may well be there before us.
Nigel, what have we learned about our people and how to manage them differently in the future?
Well, I think this is one of the most important things to come out of this very, very difficult period. I think one of the things that we have learned, as I mentioned before, is that our people are capable of tremendous things in very short periods of time, but only if we release some of the bureaucracy and constraints that we've built into our organization in the past. When this pandemic broke, I was working with one of the large universities in Australia, and the campuses were shut almost overnight. And yet that university managed to bring all of its teaching online in under 2 weeks. Now, if we'd thought about doing that in the pre-pandemic world, we would have had feasibility studies and we would have had committees established, and it would have probably taken us several years to achieve that. And yet, the reality of the pandemic meant that our people in this particular university achieved that in 2 weeks. So the learning here as well is that we can expect more from our people than we've expected in the past, but if we allow them the freedom to operate and make decisions themselves. And I think the other thing that we've learned is many of our organizations have had to move to virtual working, where our people are working from home and not in an office. And I think the other massive thing that we've learned is we can trust our people. Our people are working hard, they are delivering, and they're not being supervised on a daily basis by managers and directors. So I think the issue of understanding that people can be trusted, but you need to give them the environment in which they can achieve and remove all of the petty bureaucracy that stops people actually fulfilling their potential. And I think this is something that we should think about going forward, even when we return to the office, or if we return to the office, that we should now abolish and look at these rules that have stopped people performing in the past.
Nigel, since the digital world is gaining in importance, companies may raise questions about the place or even the impact of this technology reshaping in organizations. Now, what is your opinion? How is the digital strategy reshaping the business world?
Well, quite significantly. And to be fair, this was something that was happening pre-pandemic anyway. And the better companies were already recognizing the potential of digital technology. And thank goodness we had this digital technology already in place, because many of our businesses couldn't have survived without that technology being there. Our own training work being a classic example of that, where we've moved to substantial virtual training. And the very fact that we're having these type of discussions through Zoom technology this morning means that we are already realizing the potential of digital. But in the future, I think what I'm seeing from my clients certainly is an acceleration of digital technology into the businesses and the uncovering of new business opportunities through digital technology. So I think one of the things for all organizations to understand is they need to have a digital capability. And if they don't have a strong digital capability at the moment, they need to find ways to rapidly acquire or develop that digital capability, because the digital capability may well be the difference between them being able to reset their strategy, as we talked about before, to take maximum advantage from the post-pandemic world.
Thank you, Nigel. Goran and Nigel, thank you so much for being part of this show and for sharing these nuggets of wisdom with our viewers.
It's been a pleasure.
It was a pleasure for us as well to have you in today's edition of Learn TV. To all our viewers, thank you for tuning in and sticking with us till the end.
As we mentioned, we go live every day on LinkedIn, so make sure to tune in for one of our next episodes.
If you are joining us for the first time or just want to watch some of our episodes once again, you can visit our channel and view all of our sessions on our YouTube and Vimeo channel.
Feel free to drop us any suggestions in case there are some topics that are of interest to you. We will review them with our team and cover them for you with our experts. Until next time, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.